So what should we have as a lesson this morning from a little history we just went? Number one, for those of you that take notes, you want to write something down? Here's the first thing to write down. Trust the God who sees Israel as a nation in the last days. Only God could predict that Israel would become a united nation 2,600 years in the future. When Ezekiel wrote down what he wrote down, he said there's going to be united, both houses of Israel are going to be united into one nation, and they are going to be a sovereign nation in the future that's going to be attacked by all the nations of the world. Trust the God that saw that 2,600 years in the future. Nobody else ever would have predicted that would happen. Ezekiel 36 and 37 tell us. Look at chapter 36, verse 10 of Ezekiel. This is what God says. I will multiply men upon you. This is the land. All the house of Israel, all of it. And the city shall be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. The return of the Jews to the Holy Land after centuries of exile is predicted. You probably don't even know how serious the exile was. When the Romans got fed up with the Jews in AD 70, they not only killed 1 million of them in the city of Jerusalem, and they butchered them, and they put them on crosses, and thousands of people, and they starved them, and then they crucified them. The Romans were so angry at the rebellion that they did the first Holocaust. They just really were very angry in the destruction of Jerusalem. But they didn't stop there. They banned Jews from being in the land. They said, you may no longer live here. You get out. And the Roman Empire pushed them out of what is called Palestine today, the nation of Israel, and they pushed them to the furthest reaches of the empire. Now, a few of them stayed, but most of them left. What Ezekiel says is, look at chapter 37 and verse 12. Therefore, I prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. What happened in 1945? The liberation VE Day, the Victory in Europe Day, and the whole opening up of the Holocaust crematoriums and everything, and all the death camps. And what happened is people started looking like walking skeletons. This literally happened 37:12. I opened up your graves. Have you ever seen the picture of when they opened up those death camps and those emaciated, rag-covered Jews began walk? They looked like walking skeletons. And where did they walk to? They were drawn by the millions to Israel. The one spot they could call their own. And when they got there, they began to do something. Look at chapter 36:36. Ezekiel 36:36. The nations which are left around you will know that I, the Lord, I have rebuilt the ruined places. Do you know what those early settlers did when they left the Holocaust death camps? Do you know what they did? They went back and they moved to biblical cities. They moved to Beth El. They moved to Gibeon. And they started naming these cities after what they were called in the Bible. God says in Ezekiel 36, you're going to rebuild the ruined places. You're going to rebuild the cities that are mentioned in the Bible. And they did it. Did God make the early settlers name their cities after biblical sites? No. They wanted to tie themselves to the Bible. They wanted to tie themselves to the past. In fact, I love going over to Israel. When you go there, you'll find there's people from over 100 different countries. They're all Jews. They have one unity. They're Jews, but they come from 100 different countries. And when you ask the average Jew on the street, what are you doing here? They all say, I want to be here. It's hard. I don't know why I left my home, but I just want to be here. That's God pulling them back. Our guide that we've used for 15 years, his father was the district judge in New Jersey, had a big position, lots of money. His son was a musician and making lots of money, and he's a Jew. And he was at the height of his career in the late 70s. And all of a sudden, he just put his guitar down in New Jersey and he went and moved to a kibbutz, picking carrots. And I said, Ellie, what do you do that for? He said, I don't know. He said, I was making so much money and having so much fun in Jersey. And he said, I just felt compelled to come back here. And you know what he did? He bought a little property, and he lives on the hillside overlooking Bethlehem. And every time I visit him, he takes me out and he says, look at that. He said, that's the Bible. He said, everywhere I look, I see things from the Bible. He's not a Christian. He's not a believer. He doesn't believe the Bible like we do. But yet, he is drawn there because God drew him back. Look at Ezekiel chapter 36 in verses 8 and 9. Trust the God who said they will rebuild the ancient ruins, they will come back to the land, and they will cause the land to bloom like a rose. Look what it says in verse 8. But you, O mountains of Israel, you shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they are about to come. Verse 9, for indeed I am for you, I will turn you, and you shall be tilled and sown. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, do you know what else they did? They cut down every tree. They used it in the siege ramps. And then when the Ottomans came in, after a few centuries, they further the desolation of Israel, and they taxed every person that lived in the land and said, you're paying tax for every tree you have on your property. If you were charged tax for every tree on your property and you didn't have much money, what would you do to your trees? Yeah, cut them all down. So Israel was totally deforested for 500 years. The Romans started it, and the Ottoman Turks continued it to the end. Today, if you go to Israel, any trees you see were planted recently. Because the land became so desolate, it just looked like Death Valley. When Mark Twain went there in the 19th century, he said, this is the most godforsaken swamp and he used a lot of other coarse words. It was nothing. You know what God says? Look at 8 and 9. I'm going to cause you to be tilled and sown. I'm going to, verse 30, look at Ezekiel 36 and verse 30. I will multiply the fruit of your trees and increase your fields. Okay, in 1920, Israel had no tillable, arable land. It was just swamps and malaria and nothing. Today, the prime supplier of fruit and flowers to Europe is Israel. They sell billions and billions and billions of dollars of fruit and flowers. Why? Because God says, I will multiply, verse 30, the fruit of your trees, and I will enable you to dwell, and the ruins will be rebuilt. Verse 34, the desolate land shall be tilled. Verse 35, the land that was desolate will become like the Garden of Eden. That's the modern agricultural miracle of Israel. Did those agricultural engineers, irrigation pioneers, and desert scientists devote their lives to Israel and its wasteland condition just to make Ezekiel come true? They have perfected the art of drip irrigation. We in America are starting to use Israeli techniques. The world is finding, as water supplies decrease, that if Israeli engineering techniques are used, you can cause incredible crop yields with just drips of water. Do you think all those scientists figured that out because they wanted Ezekiel to come true? No. They probably never heard of Ezekiel. God was doing it. Because he said, I want you to know that I'm the God you can trust, because I promised that Israel would reblossom a desolate desert land and produce abundant food, fruit, and foliage. But look at 37:10. Here's the last thing. Trust the God who can do this. Ezekiel 37:10. God says the nation of Israel is going to crawl out of their graves, they're going to look like skeletons, and they're going to be just nothing. But they're going to become this, 37:10. So I prophesied as he commanded to me, and breath came into them, and they lived and they stood up in their feet, an exceeding great army. Let me ask you this. Did the atomic scientists and the military weapons engineers and the businessmen that listened to them and wanted to fulfill Ezekiel, do you think that all of the scientists that are so advanced, that are Israeli scientists developed the neutron bomb, Israeli scientists developed the atomic bomb, Israeli scientists are at the forefront of technology. Your cell phone you have in your hand was developed at a Motorola facility by a Jewish scientist. Most all of the Nobel Prizes, the majority of them have been won by Jewish scientists. Do you think that they're doing that because they read Ezekiel? No. They were trying to protect themselves, defend themselves, and make a living, but in the process, they became the third or fourth most powerful military in the world when atomic weaponry is factored in, and God was watching over His word to fulfill it. I only told you all this to say this. Everything I told you is impossible to cause to happen humanly. To take a nation that's been desolate for 2,600 years, put them back into the land that you said they would go in, have them rename every city like in the Bible, to have that desert turn into a rose, and for them to become an exceeding great army in one generation is physically, humanly impossible. God says, I'm going to do this so you would trust the God who watches over His word to perform it.